Welcome into 11 Investigates Case Files. I'm Melissa Andrews along with Brian Duggar. Today we're revisiting the December 2022 murders of 16-year-old Kamarian Wilder and 15-year-old Kyshawn Pittman.
Yeah, back in February, we did a 5-night series on this case, and what made it so unusual, other than 2 teenagers being killed, was that 11 people were convicted of having a part in these murders. And 2 men, Brent Kohlhofer and Charles Walker, are spending life in prison with no chance of parole, though both of them have upcoming appeals.
And you went to actually visit and interview Brent Kohlhofer in prison just a few days ago. What was that like? And why did you feel the need to go do that?
Yeah, actually, Brent and Charles are both in the Lebanon Correctional Institution, which is between Dayton and Cincinnati. So, you know, it's a good 2.5 hours away. And, you know, before I went to this, I actually watched an old documentary on National Geographic. They had done a story back in 2006 based on Lebanon Correctional Institution, and it scared me pretty bad because it was a pretty violent place back there. And so when I got there, you know, I was talking to some of the corrections officers and said, was it really as bad as they made it seem back then? And they're like, well, the prisoners actually have it a little better now. You know, they all have their tablets and TVs. But for corrections officers, yeah, it can be kind of a dicey place. And one thing they said, that they're having a lot of issues with laced paper. And I guess whatever reason, like I had papers with me for this interview, and I'm like, and they gave me a hard time. They're like, why are you bringing this in? And I'm like, well, because it's got my notes, it's got my questions.
I'm a journalist.
Yeah, that's what I'm going to do. And they're kind of rifling through it. And then I find out later that the inmates are like, they're putting like bug spray and like kind of liquid type stuff on paper, and they smoke it, and it makes them lose their mind. And they're saying they're having a really hard time with that in prison. So
interesting. So security was tight. So how did you find Brent Kohlhofer? And I understand his Cleveland attorney was there in the interview as well.
He was actually there. And, you know, I mean, some people, Mel, are probably going to say, why would you even give these guys the time of day? So Brent Kohlhofer and Charles Walker, I mean, they were convicted of, you know, taking, you know, Kamarian and Kyshawn away from this Maumee Avenue house, stuffing them in a trunk, beating them, killing them, and then sticking them in this vacant house where they were, eventually that house was burned down, and they were found like in the basement like 10 days after the fire, something like that. So people are gonna be like, why would you even bother? But when we did this investigation back in February, I spent a lot of time looking at some of the questions that the defense team had, and I thought they were very legitimate questions. And Brent and Charles, even though they are definitely not choir boys, I mean, they have long criminal histories, they both claim they had nothing to do with this. And some of the reasons why, it is, yeah, it makes you wonder.
So the first thing, let's start with the motive, because Brent Kohlhofer had said that he was close to Kyshawn Pittman.
Yeah, and I asked him about that because this is the thing. They're like, well, you know, Kyshawn and Kamarian had robbed your house, and you had it out for Kyshawn, and he's like, no. You know, I knew him very well. He was often over my house, and so I asked him, I said, tell me about your conversation or your relationship with Kyshawn Pittman.
And we have some sound here.
Kyshawn been around every day for months at a time, days at a time, for 6, 7, 8 months, maybe even up to a year or two before all this happened. Like on a regular basis, he's always around. He's always at my mother's house. He's always walking up and down the streets, going to the other kids' house in the neighborhood. He's over playing basketball. He works with me in the morning times if I need help on the weekends to doing the bounce houses. He helps my nephews cut the grass. Goes on the boat with us. He's been to car shows with me. He's always around.
So a couple things here, yeah, because Kyshawn was actually best friends with Brent's nephew. And, you know, Brent also mentioned these bouncy houses, which is, when I started looking into this case, I'm like, Brent Kohlhofer owned a bouncy house business? Yeah, he did. And he owned several other real estate properties on Chase Street and other areas around.
He had various ways of
Toledo.
making money, not just the drug business, but the bouncy houses. He owned several homes over there on Chase Street.
Yeah, and Kyshawn would actually help him out with not only the bouncy houses, but also he would like help paint the houses and stuff. So he was paying him to help him out.
Two things I want to point out about this. First, one of the things that we discovered during the investigation that we did back in February, that's also here on WTOL 11 Plus, is that Brent's own nephew, who you just mentioned, he himself had stolen from Brent before, or caused some trouble with his friends. So there was, you know, a group of boys, and it was always kind of said that the motive was that Brent didn't know who had stolen from him, broken a window. There were some kids who had done some various other things to acquaintances. And was it these kids? Was it these kids? And part of the motive was to the kids, well, if you didn't do this, you know who did do this.
Right. Right, absolutely. I mean, when the prosecutors and the police blamed Brent and Charles, they said it was Kamarian and Kyshawn were behind attempted break-ins at Brent's house and also Charles' house. And originally, Cruz Garcia grabbed these kids, and he believed that Kamarian had held up his mother at gunpoint. And so that's why he was angry at Kamarian. Now, Brent didn't really know Kamarian, but the prosecution and the police said, well, it was because of this initial break-in at Patriot Street, which Brent had two houses. The drug house was on Chase Street. Patriot Drive was where his main residence was.
Was that the one where the police alleged that he had $60,000 worth of marijuana there? The kids, alleging it was Kamarian and Kyshawn, set off some alarms, which triggered the police to actually go in and find all these drugs and then confiscate those.
Right, and we have some sound. Let's listen to that first. This is about the break-in, or the attempted break-in on Patriot Drive.
We was in Florida. My phone went off. It said window was broken. I called home. Kid answered the phone. I said, is somebody in the house? He said, no, the alarm's going off. I said, check to see if the window's broken. He said it was. The alarm company was calling at the same time.
Explain the kid.
My girlfriend's kid was there. The alarm company's calling. I answered the other line. I say, send the police, because I know Amber was at work. Boom. Police come. What happened, happened. About an hour later, Chuck's camera system was going off, and they was doing the same thing. Broke a window out at Chuck's house, and we could see on the video exactly who it was.
So he says he knew at this time it wasn't Kyshawn and Kamarian who broke this window. He also pointed out in your interview that police said it was $60,000 worth of weed. It was more like $2,000 worth of weed. He goes on to say that he puts hundreds of dollars of gas in his boat that he takes out multiple times a week. $150 window, $2,000 of weed is not going to cause him to go and murder two kids.
Absolutely. He was very proud of the fact that he believed, well, that he said he had very successful businesses. One of the businesses, of course, was the drug business. He was selling large quantities of marijuana out of this Chase Street house. And it wasn't just him. You know, he said something really astounding to me. He's like, yeah, we kept a key on the porch, and 24 hours a day, people were going in and out of this house doing business. But when you talk about
I made a note of that too. I wrote down fascinating, because he also said that he left phones there, and that anyone who called on these phones would know that they could get their marijuana right away by who's ever basically, it's like running a store in there. Hey, you need almost like an Uber Eats for drugs. Hey, you need your drugs, got it, I'm gonna send someone over.
Yeah.
24/7 out of this house.
Yeah, I mean, I did learn a lot out of this interview, at least what he was telling me. But when he talks about, he knew, so picture this, and I actually have an alarm system in my house, so I can understand what he's saying here. Whenever the motion sensors go off, you get a notification on your phone, and then you can go and you can click go live, and you can see what's going on there. And he said this happened. He said Patriot, I don't think he had cameras on that house, but the alarm system went off. He called the police, and then about an hour later, up on Chase Street, which is where Chuck lived, a couple houses away from the drug house, the same thing happened. A window went off, and I believe Brent and Chuck were together, and they said we were looking at his phone, and we could see exactly who it was. And one of the people, according to him, was his nephew and their two kids. And he said, look, my nephew's white, his buddy's white, and then they have a Mexican friend. Kamarian and Kyshawn are both black kids. He said it's clear as day it was not them. It was my nephew. We knew it was my nephew. So what's the motive? They said that I was upset that I got this money or these drugs confiscated by the police, but it wasn't even these kids. So why would I go after them?
It definitely is interesting that before he and Charles Walker are even called to the scene, there are other characters who have all been charged in this case as well, who did take part in the luring and beating of the boys. So, I see what you're saying. I mean, that's very interesting that, these two were called just, hey, you wanted to talk to these kids, here they are. And he's saying he was like a father figure to Kyshawn.
I mean,
so
yeah.
he very well knew him, how to get in touch with him if he wanted to. They didn't need to come to that house.
Yeah, and we're gonna ultimately put this entire interview up on YouTube and on WTOL 11 Plus, so you'll be able to see everything that happens. We're gonna do a story next week, but yes, I mean, he's right. He's like, why would I need Cruz Garcia? So the story is Cruz Garcia, they lure these kids over to the house because Corbin Gingrich believes that one of them stole a gun from him. Cruz Garcia believes that Kamarian held up his mom at gunpoint, so they wanted the kids. And then the story is, well, we know Brent and Chuck are also looking for them, so we're going to call them. And Brent says, hang on to them, we'll be right over. Well, Brent is saying, why would I need Cruz Garcia to hold these kids for me? Kyshawn was walking right by my house, a day or so ago. I know where he is all the time.
And he pointed out a situation in which Cruz Garcia actually had a problem with Kyshawn, and he came to Kyshawn's defense at a pool party or something.
Yeah, there was a pool party where I believe Cruz was mad at either Kyshawn or Kamarian, and they happened to be at this pool party that Brent and Cruz were at, and the kids were there, and Cruz is like, hey, those are the kids that held up my mom, and according to Brent, he told him, he said, look, this is my friend's party, we're not going to have trouble here, so you've got to leave. And he said he kicked him out of the party.
Okay, so all this is well and good. This is what he's saying. But police had their evidence enough to convince an entire jury of 12 people to send these men to prison. What is the evidence that he says that he didn't do this? Where was he at the time of the murder?
Yeah, so what we do know, and Charles actually said something similar, the night of the murder, that was also the Big Ten championship game between Michigan and Purdue, the football Big Ten championship game. And Charles says that he was downtown at a bar watching the game. Now, Brent said he was with his some family members up at Chase Street. They watched the first half of the game, and at Chase Street, and then he left at 10 o'clock. Now we do see on surveillance video Brent leaving the house and getting into his red truck and leaving, and that truck does not come back to Chase Street until around noon the next day. Now, according to Brent, this was very common. He would stay until 9:30, 10 o'clock, business was done. He would go sleep at Chase Street, and then he would come back. And that this is what we actually saw on the video.
And as you know, I mean, anybody who keeps track of trials or true crime, our phones are the best tracking device that have been now used as evidence in countless trials to say where we were, who we called, where the signal bounced off. There was a text between Brent and Cruz, I believe. And the context is, what was said is, I'm going to send bro. Brent texts this to Cruz, and I believe you asked him about this.
I did ask him about that, and so yeah, the phones played a big part again, which is interesting because Brent said the phones that they were tracking weren't even on him.
Those were the ones he left in the drug house.
These were the drug things. He said, I had a lot of associates, they would have them, and none of the phones are actually tracked anywhere near Maumee Avenue where they supposedly picked up these kids. But throughout the day, there were multiple calls between Cruz and Brent, and there was a text message that they used against him saying, you know, hey, I'm going to send bro. And, you know, the prosecutors and the police believe bro may have been Charles Walker. And their theory was, I'm going to send bro and we're going to pick up the kids and we're going to take them away. And then Brent shows up with Charles because he decided to come along. But the theory was that I'm going to send bro was Charles Walker. So I did ask Brent about that text message with Cruz Garcia. And so let's listen to what he said.
For one, when he called me, he was calling me for marijuana. He was calling me throughout the whole entire day for marijuana. I was kind of busy during the day, and what he wanted I really didn't have at the time. So he's calling for marijuana during the day. It's no movement. Obviously, you see in his thing, he went to a marijuana dealer and he didn't have the marijuana. Then he called me again, trying to get the marijuana that he had wanted. Oh yeah, the strand. Yeah, the quantity, the strand, where he went, they didn't have, so he called me. When he called me, I told him basically, hey, I'm watching the football game. It's over with for the night. I'll see if one of my buddies will take care of you.
Is that when you said, I'll send bro?
Yeah, that's basically when I said, text me an address, I'll send bro. You know what I mean? I'm going home for the night. I leave my phones at that house every single night when I leave. Other people work them phones. Other people work that house. That was the last conversation that was between us.
Who was bro?
At the time, it was one of my friends from out of town in Detroit. We call him Detroit, you know what I'm saying? He was working the house that night.
So the police don't believe any of that?
Well, the
prosecutors.
police never heard that story because, you know, Brent and Charles, I mean, they refused to talk to the police.
Which I brought up to you yesterday when I was going through your interview, and I just said, why didn't he just, it's one thing to be in a room with police and say, hold up, I'm gonna get my lawyer, but why not schedule a time to go in and talk with your lawyer and the police and explain all of these things?
Yeah, I mean, I did ask him that. I said, because look, 11 people were convicted in this case. 9 of them very willingly talked to police and they told stories. They told many different stories, and these stories change over time. I mean, the same
Police said they were all liars.
They were all liars except Don Eames, they said. And I asked Brent, I said, all these people were talking to police. Why wouldn't you talk to them? And he said, look, and I think he said something like, this is a law of nature or something. You don't talk to
And a lot of
the
people
cops.
feel that way. A lot of people have seen things happen, wrongly accused in various police departments, and they hold that same belief. But when you have the protection of your lawyer in there,
I mean,
why not talk?
I mean, that's certainly a good question. And you know, he said, look, I've been in trouble enough with police, which he has. There really hasn't been any other violent incidents other than back in 2013 or 2014. I believe he got charged with felonious assault. And I asked him about that, and he said, well, I was in a bar fight with my buddy. I just happened to be there. I mean, the police report says something a little different, but they did. I mean, they certainly let him plead that down to a much lower offense. So he doesn't have this violent record, but he'd had run-ins with police over drug dealings and stuff. And actually, when they showed up at his house, he told me that he thought they were there because of a drug raid, because that's why they're there. And
well, let me ask you this though, just to put him on the spot a little bit. I mean, if he had this large drug business, as he says that he did, he's saying it was $2,000 in that house. A large drug business would be more in line with what the police said, $60,000, but okay. I would tend to think that if you're already a criminal and you're already running this drug business, which he freely admits, then you will protect your property and he's coming off a little bit like he's saying, I'm just a sweet teddy bear and I'm not violent at all. There has to be a retribution if you steal from a drug dealer, not just a drug dealer, but someone who is running this large drug business.
Right.
You don't just let people in the streets get away with stealing from you, is usually how it goes.
Right. And interesting, you mentioned that $2,000. That was actually Patriot Drive. That wasn't even the drug house. So he had those other drugs in Patriot Drive. He had much more up on Chase Street. But you mentioned about the retribution, and I asked him that. I said, hey, you're a big-time drug dealer. There's got to be some sort of payback if somebody does you wrong. And he's like, well, look, these guys didn't do me wrong. I didn't even know Kamarian. And Kyshawn, he was like family to me. And we could see on the video it wasn't them. Now, when Cruz Garcia gets to the trial, he claims that at some point he goes over and talks to Brent and Charles, and they said, hey, don't worry about these kids. They're cremated. You don't have anything to worry about them. And they took that, to the end. They wouldn't give anything up. And Brent got pretty animated about this. He said, wouldn't give what up? Because if you're saying that I was upset because they broke into Patriot, those kids didn't have the drugs. The police had the drugs. The police had the guns, the money, whatever they got out of that house. He said these kids didn't have it.
But the kids breaking in, whoever they were, caused the police to go to that house.
Absolutely.
So there could be an anger from him towards whatever kids it was.
Absolutely. But what Cruz said is that these kids wouldn't give it up. They took it with them to the end. They wouldn't give it back what they had. And he's like, they didn't have anything.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
I want to ask you too, I've interviewed inmates, and I do think when you go in there, you're hearing all their side of the story at one time. Do you believe everything that he told you? Do you think he was being entirely truthful? Because I do have a hard time believing that this is a gentleman.
I do not believe everything that he told me. You also have to keep in mind that, I asked him, what do you do in here? And you have a job of some sort? And he said, yeah, I got a job, but for the most part, I do a lot of reading and looking over my case. So, this, of course, is somebody who has everything from the case. He can paint a picture. He can do whatever he wants because he's studying this all the time. He has a lot of time to think. He had a lot of time to think about what he wanted to tell me. Mm-hmm. However, I will say I believed a lot of what he was telling me because I know the police said, well, all the evidence pointed to, Chuck and Brent, but there is no evidence. There is no evidence other than Cruz Garcia, Corbin Gingrich saying that these guys did this. And the interesting thing, when you think about Cruz Garcia, he was initially charged with aggravated murder, Corbin Gingrich, aggravated murder. These guys could have gone, and we know, nobody's disputing the fact that they lured the kids over there and they beat them. And so nobody's disputing that, and not even them. But the fact is, they were facing life in prison with no chance of parole. This was their get out of jail free card. I mean, of course they're going to be in jail for 10, 15 years, but they're not going to be in jail for the rest of their life like Brent and Charles. And so I had asked Brent, what he knew about this early on, and he was talking about the streets were talking about Cruz and Gingrich kidnapping these kids, because Cruz had actually been suspected of kidnapping other kids not too long before this. So I asked him about that, and this is what he said.
Yeah, I was going over there doing some business with him, and when I was over there, I brung it up. You know what I'm saying? I literally had just got a phone call from one of the KP's family members and was asking me about Cruz and Corbin. And I told him, I'm like, I really don't know the Corbin guy. I've only met him a couple times. But Cruz, I'm actually going over there right now. I'm gonna see what's going on. When I went over there, him and his brother was over there, and I brung it up to him. And the brother told me, basically, only reason they'd be saying our name because we done did something like this before. They kidnapped someone before. And I'm like, well, I'm just telling you, the streets is talking, man. And the people that's talking ain't really, you know what I'm saying? They don't really play no games.
So what does that mean? I thought that was interesting. He says the streets is talking and people that's talking don't play no games. Who would that be?
I think he's just talking about the people in the street. Like, there are serious people, that would know about such things, and they're not playing games. They're not making this up, and they're saying Cruz and Gingrich and Cruz's brother were all involved, and that's Brent's thing. He said, I didn't know anything about this. I knew the kids were missing because Kyshawn is best friends with his nephew. And as he said there, and again, this is him saying this, I don't know if it's
At
true.
this point, when he's confronting Cruz, does he know that Cruz is throwing him under the bus?
He doesn't know that. And Cruz did not initially throw him under the bus. It was like 3 or 4 weeks after the fact that they got arrested, because initially when Cruz and Gingrich talked to the police, there was a story early on that 2 black guys showed up and took the kids away. Then it was black guys in masks, and then it was just black guys without masks. And then it ended up being Brent and Charles.
Which I think is very interesting, because you see him separating his behavior from what ultimately led to the boys' death, which is the point that they were taken away. So almost like, I'll admit to this, but this is going to be on these black guys at first, and then Brent and Chuck.
Yeah, and if you want to look at it from the role, if this is what happened, say Cruz Garcia actually killed these kids, and he was looking for a way out of this situation, him and Corbin. And again, we don't know. We know what the jury thinks. We know what the police and the prosecutor thinks. However, if Cruz and Corbin, if those kids got killed in that house, at that point, they lured them there, they kidnapped them, they killed them. That's aggravated murder, aggravated kidnapping. They are never getting out of prison. Now, Cruz is streetwise enough. He's been in trouble plenty of times. Is he thinking, okay, how do I get out of this? And how I might get out of it is saying, hey, we kidnapped the kids, but someone else came and took them away.
Now, these aren't all rocket scientists, these criminals who were in this house. Do you think that it's possible that they all got on the same page and told the same story and stuck to it and, formulated all this? And that you got to have some level of intelligence to do that.
Yeah, and you're right. I don't think they're rocket scientists, but I do believe that they were street smart. And I think there's a big difference. You see a lot of people who maybe they didn't graduate from high school, and then certainly not graduate from college, but they know how the street works. They know how it works when you're dealing with the court system, with police, they know what they might need to say.
Okay, so one of the things that Brent and I guess Chuck are saying in their appeal is they're pointing to a text message that was from Don Eames to his girlfriend. Don Eames, as you pointed out, is one of the only people in the case, maybe the only, that police say they believed him, that they didn't really catch him lying. Tell us about this text and why this is so significant.
Yeah, and we have this in the entire interview. We don't have the clip cut right now for it, but yeah, so Don Eames, it was a couple days, or it was a night after these kids were taken away and probably killed. Now, he was sleeping in this Maumee Avenue house. This is Corbin's house and Carissa Eames' house. I guess Carissa's his sister, and he's sleeping on a couch or something. And Don is messaging his girlfriend and says, hey, come pick me up. I can't believe you left me here overnight to sleep in a house where these kids were just killed last night. And she's kind of going back and forth and like, well, whatever. Surprisingly, she didn't say, what are you talking about? She just said, look, I'll get you whenever, you know, I get you. And he's like, man, I can't believe you're playing me like this, letting me stay here. Okay, so this is a guy who would have known, I mean, he was there. He admitted to hitting the kids. He was there when all this went down in the basement of Maumee Avenue. So this is really important because if he is saying these kids died in Maumee Avenue, that means they were never taken away by anyone. And definitely not Brent and Charles, but not anyone. So they died in that house. So if that is true, Brent and Charles had nothing to do with this.
But this text was not admissible by the judge. She ruled it not admissible.
Yeah, she said it was hearsay, which I still haven't been able to get a clear understanding of why it's hearsay, because other text messages were used throughout that trial. But I can tell you, because Brent both of them have filed their appeals, Brent and Chuck, and there are going to be oral arguments next Wednesday in Brent's case, and a key part of their appeal are these text messages.
So here's my thing. Why not just call Don Eames to the stand, confront him directly about those texts?
Right. And they did call Don Eames to the stand. And interestingly, when the state responded to, Chuck and Brent's appeal, they kind of made this comment. They're like, well, they could have called Don Eames to the stand, but they didn't do that. Now, that was an error in the original filing because they did. I went back and looked at the court transcript several times. They called Don Eames to the stand, and he took the fifth. Now, Don Eames got a deal from the state. So I don't know what all that deal entailed, but he took the fifth. And did he take the fifth? Because if they ask him about these text messages and they're like, well, we know you were there because you said you were there. And if he admits that he was there and the kids died there, he could get complicity to murder. So, yeah. I mean, so they did call him. They did want to try to get this out of him, and they could not.
It'll be interesting to see, how that gets handled on the appeal. So we have the verdict. Both of these men are going to prison for this. And you asked Brent Kohlhofer what it was like when he heard that verdict.
Yep.
Here's that.
I almost passed out and fell to the floor. My knees got weak. I felt they got it completely wrong. I don't even understand how they got it right at all. There was no physical evidence, no DNA evidence. The cell phone evidence says we wasn't in the area. And you're basically found a guilty plea on two liars that lied multiple times, that changed their story multiple times. Every time a piece of discovery packet came in, they changed their story to try to match it up with the next man's story. I don't know, man. We called Don to the stand to testify. I mean, it was part of his plea agreement not to testify. I don't know. It's just a sad situation. It's a sad situation all the way around the board.
So he mentions a couple of interesting things there. He talks about, first of all, the DNA. So they had swabbed Charles Walker's trunk because the theory is that they stuffed these 15 and 16-year-old kid into this trunk, duct taped them, took them away, and they swabbed the trunk, and there was no DNA found in there, which, Brent made a big point of the fact that, look, you've got two big kids, 15 and 16-year-old boys, they're in there, they're supposedly bleeding from their head,
Thrashing around, probably.
Thrashing around, because look, Kyshawn at one point pulled a gun on these kids in the basement, and they were fighting back. Are they going to willingly go into a trunk where they know nothing good's gonna happen and just lie there without moving, not punching the hood, not doing anything? So he's like, it doesn't make any sense. They swabbed it. There was no DNA.
Mm-hmm. So what do you think it is then that convinced all these people that these two guys did this? If you see these questions, I know not every juror is a smart juror or, whatever, but 12 people agreed to this. Yeah, and,
it was very, again, we read the transcripts. We know what happened in court. We know that Cruz Garcia and Corbin Gingrich got up there and they told the same story. In court, they didn't tell the same story to police, but in court, they clearly told them that, look, yeah, I beat him. Yeah, we kidnapped him. Yeah, we lured him over here, but we didn't kill him because Brent and Chuck came along and they took him away and we don't know what happened. And then after the fact, I confronted them and they said, don't worry about it. They've been cremated. So you have two guys, convicted felons, on the stand, known liars. Even the detectives said that they lied over and over and over.
And they brought out that they got deals, right?
And they got deals. Let me
ask you this. So Brent doesn't say that he was with Chuck that night. So does he think that Chuck could be involved in this? Because Chuck is really no angel. He's had very similar case against him that I believe he was indicted or close to being indicted for something very similar.
Yeah, there was a 2016 case where he was actually indicted for aggravated murder. And it actually involved two kids, I believe, where they were essentially assassinated. And he was the guy that was suspected of being the gunman. And for whatever reason, that case fell apart. I don't know why. I know that Chuck says he also was not involved in that case, but the case fell apart and they had to dismiss the charges.
So if Brent's not with Chuck that night and he knows that about Chuck, does he believe Chuck is involved in this?
I did ask him whether he thinks Chuck is involved, and he said no, I don't.
But he thinks Cruz is.
Yes, and I think, nope, don't have that clip, but at one point I said, what do you think happened? And he said, what I think happened, I think Corbin and Don Eames and Cruz and all those guys were over there. There were like 4 adults, 2 other juveniles.
We actually do have this. It's at the end of this bite that we have right here. So let's play this bite. It's about what he thinks happened and people thinking that he's a monster.
You're gonna think somebody did something when you ain't seen all the evidence and you ain't seen all the statements and you ain't seen from the outside looking in. Of course I'd be considered a monster. Who wouldn't? You would be too. This is a horrible situation from the outside looking in, but if you know the facts and know me personally, you know I'm not a monster. There's nothing that could trick my mind to telling me I'm a monster. There's no way possible. It's just none. It's none.
And I guess this will be the last thing I'll ask you, but tell me what you think happened.
I mean, I think them guys that was drunk and under the influences of marijuana and alcohol and a situation over on Maumee Street where there was 4 or 5 grown adults and 2 extras on the side, got out of hand and did what they did. I personally can't tell you. My thoughts is that whatever happened at that house in Maumee.
So two thoughts from that. First, I go back to I've never met your neighborhood friendly drug kingpin. Never happened. The second thing is I can also see a theory that they're all in the basement. They want to give the kids some retribution for doing this and that, the various things that we know that they did or were thought to have done. And that Kyshawn pulls out a gun, which was alleged, and that it gets out of hand there. I could see that scenario.
Look, that makes more sense to me. Cruz Garcia had serious motive in the fact that he believed one or both of these kids were involved in pulling a gun on his mother, like pulled a gun on her when her house was robbed. That's serious motive. Corbin Gingrich had serious motive because he believed Kamarian, I think, stole the gun.
Kamarian was dating his niece.
Right, stole a gun from him. So are they drunk? Are they high? Are they getting angry thinking about this? Does it go too far? That makes sense because we know yes, they lured these kids. I mean, they arranged an Uber ride to this house. So none of that is in dispute. They have motive. We know what they did. We know they're in the basement. We know they're being beat. So that's motive. Do Brent and Charles have motive? They say they don't.
So I want to wrap up with this. Looking at you've now talked to all sides of this, all the key players. What are the bullet points that you think they need to hit on appeal to win this?
I think the text message is key. I mean, I don't understand. Of course, I'm not a lawyer, but I've looked at this case exhaustively, and other text messages were introduced. I do not understand why this text message was not introduced from Don Eames saying that these kids died in the basement. So I think if they can get the judges to agree, I mean, ultimately they want them to get a new trial. They want it to be sent back to common pleas, have a new trial. They want to be able to introduce this. So if that text message gets in there, would that be able to change the tide? I don't know. But they also need to make the point, and I think they're going to be doing this, is that where's the evidence? Where is the evidence? And we've seen this in other cases I've looked at. You get a felon who's trying to save his own life, and make no mistake about it, Cruz Garcia and Corbin Gingrich were saving their own life. They would be locked up for the rest of their lives, and they will now be out of prison by the time they're no later than 45 years old. So, whether they did it, whether Brent and Charles did it, this deal saved them from spending life in prison.
So what about the families? And I don't want to say families plural, really, because we only talked to Kamarian's family. But if you're them, what are you thinking about this? I mean, they've gone along with the police and the prosecutor theory the whole time, and this would just certainly throw everything back into a tailspin.
Yeah, I mean, they're not going to be happy. They're not going to be happy about the fact that we went down there and interviewed Brent. I mean, they were upset, and understandably so, that as part of our series, we looked at the defense side. But that's what we do as journalists. We need to look at all sides of a story. I don't believe something just because the police tell me, or the prosecutor tells me, or Brent Kohlhofer tells me. I don't believe it just because of those words. I believe it because of what we look at, and it's not even our point to tell people what to think. What we want to do is give them the whole story. So we give them the evidence, we give the interviews with the family, with Brent, with Charles, with the attorneys, the prosecutor, the police. We tell the whole story. And then it's up to people to make their own mind. But of course, the family, Kamarian's family, they believe that not only Brent and Charles were involved in this, but Cruz and Corbin, and they want all these guys to be spending the rest of their lives in prison. And, you know, they're not going to believe this. And I understand that. I understand that.
So what's coming up next?
I mean, what's coming up next, they're going to have, first of all, we're going to, on Tuesday, we'll have a story about this interview. We'll put the entire...
So this is going to live forever. So we're talking mid-May here. So if you see this months from now, okay?
Yes.
You're talking about this hearing coming up.
That is true. So the entire interview will be up. They will be having a hearing on May 21st for Brent, and I believe Chuck's oral argument will be June 2nd. And by oral argument, each side gets 15 minutes. So the defense attorneys will get 15 minutes to convince this 3-judge panel why they deserve a new trial. The state will get 15 minutes to say, look, there were no errors here. They do not deserve a new trial.
Interesting.
So that's what's coming up.
Okay, so we're going to put the full interview with you and Brent Kohlhofer on Plus. And we've also got the original 30-minute special that we did. It has all the stories, so maybe you happen upon this episode, you can go back and watch how we lay it out, because it is pretty complicated with all of these defendants. And then, of course, on WTOL 11 News, we will follow these appeals, and then if it warrants, I'm sure we'll have another Case Files episode dedicated to this.
Yeah, because they can go to the 6th district, but then I'm sure there's other places they can go after that. So these appeals are going to go on for a while.
Thanks so much for catching up with us here on 11 Investigates Case Files. We'll see you next time.